yourself on someone is a grave matter and an act of pure evil. This mortal sin violates the integrity and freedom of the victim and can damage their soul for the rest of their life.
Probably one of the worst mortal sin, because it's so degrading, to the person, that's, being raped. The dignity, your personal space, everything, and it takes it away from you. Takes away your dignity. It makes it hard to want to be in a relationship. It ruins your trust in people, and often, it makes you turn away from God. God, if you love me, how could you, have let this happen to me? And one of the things I've come up with or discovered as I went through my cancer is that God doesn't allow you to be raped, okay? Rape happens because of the sin of Adam and Eve, and it's one of the sins that's crept into the world. And every time this happens, we tend to want to blame God, for this, but like I said, God doesn't make this happen. It's really the evil one, who allows this to happen, because every time we experience something horrible, it tends to drive us further away from God. We tend to question God. How can you let this happen? If you're a God, why didn't you stop it? If you love me, why didn't you stop it? It's like all those young children, that drowned out in Houston in that flash flood. I know Linda said, how can God allow that to happen? And people tend to get angry at God for that. And when you're angry, anger replaces love. And therefore, we tend to distance ourselves from God, and that's not God's doing. That's what Satan wants us to do. He wants us to distance ourselves, from God. So we have to understand that God only does good things. Could God prevent it? Yes. Could God prevent cancer? Yes. Why does it happen? We don't know. Maybe it's a test of faith. Maybe it's Satan's way of making someone question, their belief and trust in God. But in the end, God is always and only good. He can only do good things. Always will do good things. So in the end, goodness always overcomes evil. So, and we may not understand why or the hows of it in this life, but maybe one day we will. So, anyways, okay, sorry.
Okay, so stealing. Stealing is also a mortal sin if the amount stolen is great. If the amount stolen is negligible, then it is a venial sin. Taking something that's not yours is a direct violation of the seventh commandment, making it a grave sin. That even St. Paul wrote in the Bible that thieves and swindlers have no place in the kingdom of God. And that's from 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9 to 10.
And so go back to stealing. When we do these examinations of conscience, when we have our penance services, things like that, stealing is not necessarily taking something material. Sometimes you can take somebody's reputation. When you gossip about somebody and you don't know if it's true, we shouldn't be gossiping in the first place. But do we pass on, those stories to other people? That's also a form of stealing. That's also a form of killing. You can kill people's reputations real easily. So remember the 7 deadly sins? Who can name them without looking at the board? Go ahead, Lisa.
All right, so deadly sins. The 7 deadly sins are considered to be the most serious sins man can commit. As such, they deserve a spot on this list. As per Catholic teaching, the 7 deadly sins include pride, anger, lust, envy, gluttony, avarice, sloth.
So when you look at that, each one of those 7 deadly sins really is rooted in one thing: selfishness. Our own personal selfishness. We can boast about ourselves, and lose humility. And what's the recent scriptures have been all about? You know, don't take the place of honor. You know, take the last seat. You know, when we're filled with anger, you know, love is replaced, you know, with something that it just kills people. Same way with lust and envy and gluttony. And gluttony is just not about food. When I was growing up, you know, because I was always fat, heavy, I always thought that I was a terrible person, you know, because I was considered a glutton. But gluttony is not just about food. You know, you could be a glutton about material positions as well, or material things as well, and other things besides just material things. You know, again, maybe your goal in life is to be have the most hits on YouTube or the most hits on X or whatever it's called now. You know, so whenever we put things like that ahead of, if we're going to be a glutton, it should be for loving God. Okay, that should be what we should always be striving for. That should be our one focus. And I don't think that, you know, type of gluttony would be considered one of the 7 deadly sins. All right.
Go on. Okay. So taking advantage of the poor. According to Pope Pius X, oppressing the poor and taking advantage of their plight is one of those sins that cry to God for vengeance. This includes defrauding your workers of their wages. It's equivalent to stealing, which is another grave offense. These acts are not only sinful in the eyes of God, but also of men.
And you know, today the world takes so much advantage, you know, of the poor, the unemployed, the underemployed. I don't get mad. I used to have an anger problem. I don't get mad anymore just to fly off the handle because somebody said something that I didn't like. Pretty much matured through all of that thing. But when I see somebody, you know, being mistreated, that's still really angry, and I will step in and step up, you know, and address that. I'm not afraid to do that at my age. What are they going to do to me, you know? So, but I think, you know, we need to, you know, we need to know when it's appropriate, you know, to stand up as Christians, and, you know, when sometimes, you know, it's better just to keep our mouths shut, because you're not going to be able to ever convince people who are of this strong opinion that, you know, you're right and they're wrong. So, but that doesn't mean we don't try, okay? And there's other ways to address it sometimes, besides with just words. You know, prayer is always the best answer in these situations.
All right, blasphemy. In his writings, St. Thomas Aquinas states that blasphemy, or any word or deed that is an insult to God, is much more grievous than perjury. Using the name of the Lord in vain is not only an insult to the holiness of his name, but also a violation of the second commandment.
I think that's pretty self-explanatory, you know. I have a friend, you know. Remember I told you my mother-in-law wouldn't say cuss words, but she would spell them out? So I have a friend, you know, he's a sailor, so you know he swears, you know. Spent 12 years in the Navy. And so when he gets upset, instead of saying JC, he goes neat or nice, you know. It's the same thing, you know. Stop it, you know. Stop it, you know. One of the great dangers in our society today is this what I call the philosophy of rationalization. Where, you know, we can say, well, I didn't actually say JC, you know, but still, you know, it's like this word frickin'. I hate that word. You know what they're substituting that word for, you know? And anyways, it doesn't, just because we didn't say the real word doesn't mean, you know, people aren't connecting and understanding it, you know? So, okay.
Do you want me to continue?
Please,
No,
you're doing a great job.
So venial sins are less serious offenses against God than mortal sins, and they do not sever one's relationship with God. They can be thought of as imperfections in thought, word, or deed that wound but do not destroy one's relationship with God.
And I want you to keep those two lines, those two paragraph sentences in mind, because that is going to really affect how you see and try to understand, the importance of purgatory. Okay, so they're less serious offenses. They're still an offense, okay, against God than mortal sins, but they do not sever our relationship with God. And no matter how hard we try, you can walk into confession and walk right back out, and there's going to be a venial sin of some type that we're going to do, because none of us are perfect, okay? Which is why I like the Confiteor, the things I've done and the things I've failed to do. And most of the things I've failed to do, I don't even give a thought to. I don't even know I'm doing it. And so these type of sins need to be thought of as imperfections, okay? But they do not destroy our relationship with God, okay? It just makes us, imperfect enough that at our death we would not be able to enter directly into heaven. Okay, Lisa.
So the examples include minor lies, gossip, impatience, or excessive attachment to worldly things.
So that doesn't mean you can go out and lie and gossip, okay?
So
and be impatient.
If you're impatient on the confession line, do you need to ask that? Because that happens to me. Right? It's like, come on, speed it up.
And that's one of the...
It happens, right?
Yeah. And I said to a group of people I was with, not recently, I said, these last 7 months of my cancer journey has been really some of the best 7 months of my life. And somebody said, how can you say that? I'm not lying, it hasn't been easy, okay? But I have learned so much about myself. I've learned what true trust is, and I've really learned, what patience is, okay? Because, from the first time I was diagnosed, from the first time I received my radiation treatments, from that point on, I just wanted to know, is this working? And I can accept, I tell you all, I accepted whatever the outcome's going to be, good, bad, indifferent. I'm okay with that. But I think we're all just kind of human, and we want to know, what's happening inside me, and where am I at? And so, even questioning, God sometimes, I think you can put that in there as well. Questioning God. I think it's okay to question God. But in this time, when I was questioning God, he just spoke to me and said, I know you love the book of Job, which I do. So see how smart God is? He knows me. And he said, go back and reread the book of Job. Because your life mirrors his life. Everything that he had was taken away from him. Yet did he abandon his faith? And did he have a lot of questions? Yes. But in the end, he realized who is in control of his life. It's not you and me. We're not in control of our life. God is in control of life. His will be done, not ours, right?
Right.
So, Lisa?
Okay, me too.
Hit click.
All right. So important considerations. Full knowledge and consent. So a sin is considered venial when it is committed with less than full knowledge or full consent of the will.
Out of ignorance, maybe. Out of an incompletely formed conscience. They're not excuses. Sin is sin, but again, I think sometimes we beat ourselves up when we do things and we realize, we've gone against, God's will. It makes it hard to live with ourselves, which is the beauty of going to the sacrament of reconciliation. I think our priests do a good job of helping us to work through those things. Okay.
All right. Not a complete break. So venial sins do not completely sever a person's relationship with God, unlike mortal sins.
Okay.
Can be forgiven. Venial sins can be forgiven through prayer, acts of contrition, reception of the sacraments like Holy Communion, and other acts of penance. Okay. Examination of the conscience. Catholics often use an examination of the conscience to identify venial sins as part of preparing for confession or spiritual reflection.
And like I said, it's part of the things that I do every night. I love the night prayer of the office better than I do evening prayer. I just went to confession. Because within the night prayer, it does allow for that examination of conscience. And I love to use the confiteor because of those words, which really helps me to to focus in. And I'm grateful for all the things that I did do, because by God's grace, I got to do those. God puts people in our lives on a daily basis. When they reach out to us, we can, do our best to spend time with them, to listen to them. Or we can just say, I'm just too busy, or we, like I said, we can walk by somebody, hey, you got a minute? No, I can't right now, shame on us, and so it helps me, to become a better person and aware of where I need to improve, my life, as a Christian. So this is really small.
Examples of venial sins: minor lies, telling a small lie, exaggerating the truth, or deceiving someone in a minor way.
Okay, so one quick question about lies. Are all lies venial sins?
No.
Anybody?
No.
Who said no, and why did you say that? Gail?
Of course, it might hurt someone's feelings if they ask me, do I look fat in this? That's cute.
Okay, yeah, right. Yeah, Angie?
If your lie causes something, some harm, could cause a death, it could cause lots of things, and then considered a mortal sin and not a venial.
Absolutely. So, yeah. So, sometimes the best honesty is not to be honest with people, okay? And again, you have to understand where people's at, and like Angie said, what that situation is, and the harm that can come, from the truth. And in the end, it really doesn't matter. Go back to Gail's question. It really doesn't matter if that dress makes you look fat or not. So if somebody says, "No, you look great," I don't think God cares about what dress you wear or anything else. Okay, so maybe in church, but so that's a whole nother story. So, yep. Anyone else? So, okay, Lisa.
All right, gossip: sharing negative information about someone, even if true, without a just reason.
Don't you find as we get older, we're more aware of the harm of gossip, and we do it less? That's I think that's one of the wisdoms of growing older. We may not be able to physically do what some of these 20 and 25-year-old kids can do, but they don't have the wisdom that we have, and one of the gifts of old age is the fact that, we recognize the harm that some of this, and the ignorance and the importance, I think a lot of people talk too much. They offer their opinion without being asked, and so sometimes the less we say, the better listener, the better person we become. So, okay.
All right, rash judgments: making negative assumptions about someone's character or actions without sufficient evidence.
Yeah, we do that all the time, right? Jump to conclusions, and then we find out when there's nothing further from the truth. And it's kind of like trying to put toothpaste back in a tube. Once our words are out there, you can't put it back in the tube. So they are what they are. You can be forgiven, but we've said those, and it's hard. Jesus said forgive. He never said that we need to forget. It's hard. That's part of our humanness, and part of the reason why He doesn't want us to forget is because hopefully we learn from our mistakes so we don't make them over and over and over again. So.
All right. Unkind words: speaking harshly, rudely, or disrespectfully to or about others. Commentary?
No.
Okay. Lack of charity: failing to show love and compassion to others, or engaging in negative thoughts or attitudes.
Some of these are pretty self-explanatory.
Okay. Disobedience in minor matters. Slightly disobeying rules or authority figures or failing to fulfill minor obligations.
So we all have a responsibility, to be good, moral, citizens, civilly and,
From the property tax
in the
situation
church,
is very
okay? Rules are rules, okay? And again, it's kind of like the lives. As Jesus often taught, sometimes things will never change, if there's a rule that's put in place, that's not good, for people. And so sometimes we do have to speak up about those rules. And there's going to be times when we're going to disobey those rules because nothing's going to change, if we don't begin, to do something about it. You have to pay your income tax, okay? Sorry, that's the rule. That's what it is. But it's like if you went to Mass today and you heard Mike preaching about the disciples picking the heads of grain. They were hungry, and yes, there's a Mosaic law that considered that work. But the greater need, the greater good was, to feed people who are hungry, even if it's on the Sabbath. That's what David did, when he went into the temple and was given the holy bread. So, doesn't mean that you can go out there and you can disobey every rule. You can't go down 278 driving 80 miles an hour, even though most people do. Speed limit is still 45 or 55, depending where you're at, okay? But again, obeying the rules. Moral law, God's laws. We can never question God's laws, okay? His laws are always true, they're always perfect, and there's nothing we could do to add to that to make them any more perfect, all right? But sometimes when we look at other situations, we need to question that. And even in the Catholic Church, like right now, I've got a discussion group going on with Father Miles up at the Chancery, and he takes care of annulments. And so my dialogue with him is that, here is a Catholic, who wants to make right something that they did, not being married in the church, not getting annulment before they married civilly, and now they want to have that marriage annulled, and yet one of the spouses does not want to participate. What do we do with that person? They want to live out their Catholic faith. They want to be able to receive the sacraments. But because of the law of the church or the non-law of the church, what do we do? With that person. I don't know what's going to happen, but hopefully it'll spur some conversation somewhere. Okay, I'm sorry.
Neglecting spiritual duties. Missing Mass without serious reason or failing to pray regularly.
And again, sometimes people get upset because they miss Mass because they're sick. If you're sick, okay, that's a serious reason, okay? If you don't get the Adoration Chapel, because you have a valid reason to do that, that's okay, If you don't pray every day, I think we pray more than what we realize, because we're so ingrained as Catholics, that we have all these memorized prayers, but yet, have you ever said, I love you to your spouse or to your grandchildren or your children? That's prayer. It's an expression of love. That, you may not have begun in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I love you, honey. It doesn't have to be, necessarily like that, but, and again, people who miss Mass, most of those people feel horrible about that. There was a time in my life where I couldn't make Sunday Mass. And so my priest said, make a weekday Mass your Sunday Mass, okay? And so it just happened to work out that as I was traveling, I could stop in one of the parishes that had a very early Mass, and that was fulfilling my Sunday obligation. did I miss the Sunday? Yeah, I felt bad, but, you know, this was better than not going to Mass at all and not being able to see the Eucharist, so, okay, sorry.
Excessive attachment to worldly things. Being overly attached to material possessions, pleasure, or status.
Self-explanatory.
Temptation. Giving into temptation in a minor way or not resisting temptation strongly enough.
And I think that's an area right there that we really all need to work on, because, like I said, I'm not a very patient person, and we tend to, you know, just respond instantaneously. And when we react, you know, that way, we're not taking the time to process the whole thing. I think I've gotten better at that, you know, over the years. Because like I said, you know, I used to be angry. I could get angry real easy. But now I realize that I need to stay in control. I'm supposed to be a leader in the church. I'm supposed to be a leader in my family. And I don't want that example being sent out to you. Look at him. You know, he preaches, but he doesn't practice what he preaches. And so I really do think, you know, when we get into those types of temptation, you know, when we're tempted, what's the best thing to do when we get tempted?
Pray.
Absolutely, you know, take it to the Lord in prayer. Absolutely. Okay. And my favorite, anger.
Anger in certain contexts. Getting angry in ways that is not proportionate to the situation or that leads to hurtful actions.
And again, don't justify your anger because Jesus, you know, took out a whip and upset the coin tables and set free the birds and stuff like that. Well, if Jesus can be angry, I can be angry. Totally different, you know, two different things, okay? So, two different concepts. Jesus was upset because of the desecration, you know, to his Father's house, the temple. That's what got him upset. He wasn't upset with the fact that these things were happening. It was just the fact that, again, you know, the Pharisees and the scribes, they were taking advantage, you know, of the sacrificial recourse of Moses, you know, to put money in their own pocket. So, anyway. Okay, so purification is like I said, is a cleaning process of learning to God perfectly, as it is our goal as of our Christian lives and the basis to achieve, you know, eternal life. Why? Because purgatory is a place in which we will be cleansed of all our unconfessed sins to achieve the perfect holiness necessary to enter the joys of heaven. So, I'm going to kind of stop there, and I'm going to invite Lisa to come up, and she has got some artworks that's going to kind of talk about some of what we recovered.